Good evening. My name is Thomas Kaplan, and I have the pleasure of serving as the president of the board of directors of the 92nd Street Y. We have two very, very special speakers joining us this evening who will be talking about the importance of sustainable partnerships, a commitment to values, and ethical leadership. We're also very fortunate that they've agreed to sign books immediately after this program. So for any of you who are interested, be prepared. To introduce our featured guests, please let me welcome someone who is the personification of the invaluable ideas contained in tonight's discussion. Congresswoman Carolyn Maloney not only is the leader of New York's 14th Congressional District, which we are sitting in right now, I might add, she is a champion of the mission and the work of the 92nd Street Y. In particular, in 2008, Carolyn Maloney spearheaded federal appropriation funds to support the Y's arts, science, and literacy education program for at-risk school children. The impact of these programs opens the eyes of these young people to ideas and concepts of learning, values, and leadership, exactly those which we will be discussing tonight. We are honored to welcome a great ambassador for the 92nd Street Y and a great representative of New York City, Congresswoman Carolyn Maloney, to introduce our program this evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so very much. Before I introduce tonight's speakers, I would like to thank the 92nd Street Y staff, its remarkable executive director, Saul Adler, and its amazing board president, Tom Kaplan. The 92nd Street Y is a neighborhood treasure that has enlightened, invigorated, and delighted residents of this community for over 133 years, with exceptional programming like tonight's program, an extraordinary gym and athletic program, and wide range of classes for people of all ages. Thank you so much for hosting this dialogue between Thomas Friedman and Dov Seidman on long-term prosperity and the importance of building sustainable companies through good governance and a corporate culture of honesty and ethical leadership. Thomas Friedman is a world-renowned author and three-time Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist and commentator. He is a best-selling author of numerous books that translate complex economic and political events into prose that economists praise and non-economists can easily understand. In a New York Times review of his book, The World is Flat, Nobel Prize-winning economist Joseph Stiglitz wrote, and I quote, "One mark of a great book is that it makes you see things in a new way, and Mr. Friedman certainly succeeds in that goal." A 2009 National Journal's Washington Voices poll ranked Thomas Friedman as one of the top opinion makers among Democrats, second only to Nobel Prize-winning economist and fellow New York Times columnist Paul Krugman. His 1989 book, From Beirut to Jerusalem, won the National Book Award and is still considered to be the definitive text on the Middle East. And an updated version of his book, Hot, Flat, and Crowded, Why We Need a Green Revolution and How It Can Renew America, has just been released in paperback with updated information. He is joined tonight by Dov Seidman, the author of Why How We Do Anything Means Everything in Business and in Life. At a time when corporations often make the headlines for bad behavior, Dov Seidman wants to teach corporate leaders that ethical behavior is good for the bottom line. And indeed, just this past Friday, the House passed a financial restructuring bill that, as a member of the Financial Services Committee, we have been working on for well over a year. While the House bill provides additional oversight and regulation to the financial sector, it also provides for additional transparency, which should help companies rebuild relationships and reputations that were damaged in the financial crisis. Effective oversight and good regulation are one way to keep companies honest. Dov Seidman takes a different approach, in many ways a more optimistic approach. He hopes to persuade business leaders to do the right thing for their own self-interest. He is the founder, chairman, and chief executive officer of LRN, a company that helps businesses develop ethical corporate cultures and inspire principled performance. Now that just seems like good old common sense. Mr. Seidman advocates an end to short-term thinking and decision-making and urges business leaders to focus instead on building truly sustainable enterprises. In his view, sustainability requires a long-term commitment to how a company relates to employees, partners, customers, investors, and to the environment in which it conducts business. And good relationships, he argues, are the key to profitability. Earning a good reputation, increasing customer loyalty, and improving employee morale will help corporations do better in the long run. I look forward to tonight's discussion, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Good evening, and thank you, Congresswoman Maloney and Tom Kaplan and all the wonderful folks at the Y for having us. And it's really special for me to be here. This is my first time, and it's especially special for me, Tom, to share the stage with you. It's special and an honor. Tonight, this is an important evening. The New York Giants are taking on the Eagles. They just kicked off. Playoff implications at stake. And I come from Los Angeles. If the Lakers were playing tonight, this room could not be full of people who want to nonetheless hear about some ideas. So I'm inspired by your presence. But there's so much more in common with us tonight and what's going to happen at Giants Stadium than you at first blush might think. There's actually a profound connection. A couple of years ago, Tom Coughlin, the coach of the New York Giants, his job was on the line, and his owners told him that if he doesn't win, he's out. And he went on a transformational journey. He used to be considered an autocratic, distant figure. He used to find players who came early to meetings because they didn't come early enough. He would put buckets on the field and tell his players that if they don't throw up into these buckets, he will assume they didn't play hard enough. And when he fought for his job, he could have hunkered down, yelled even louder, and been more commanding and more in sync with the Colonel, which became his nickname. And instead, he decided to extend trust to his players. He set up a leadership council in the locker room and told his players, you make some key decisions. He started to connect with them outside of football because, after all, it's more than a game. And he talked to them about their families and life off the field, about performing on the field and behaving off the field. And then he enlisted them in an ethic of what a champion does and how a champion ought to behave. And they beat the New England Patriots, who was heavily favored in the Super Bowl. Tom Coughlin understands that we have entered the world of behavior. Not only is behavior under more scrutiny, as Tiger Woods is living through these days, than ever before, behavior is actually a source of advantage if you can use behavior to relate to people in new ways. So the journey that Tom Coughlin went on, I believe, is a metaphor for the journey of what we're going to describe in the next hour together and through some dialogue with you. A journey for individuals, a journey for leaders, and a journey for countries, governments, and companies, of course. And Tom, what I said about behavior, I think behavior has always mattered. But it matters now in unimaginable ways because of the world that you've described. You've connected dots that most of us can't see. You've explained how the world works and the implications of how the world works in profound ways, but you've illuminated for us the journey we need to go on. And your explanation has catalyzed so many people and so many organizations and political leaders to go on this journey of understanding that we have two choices. In this hot, flat, and crowded world, in this hyper-connected, flat world, we can hunker down and avoid exposure and cling to the frameworks and our habits of thought and behavior that got us here. or we can lean into this world and say, what about it must I understand, and how do I turn its conditions to my advantage? And with that, why don't I turn it over to you and continue to illuminate that picture, and then let's talk about what it means for us.
Well, Dov, thank you. It's a treat to be here. You're probably wondering, how did the two of us ever get connected? Dov runs a company that specializes in ethics and counseling big corporations on ethical behavior. I'm the foreign affairs columnist for the New York Times. But 5 years ago, I was 5 or 6 years ago now, I don't even remember exactly. I was out in Aspen, Colorado over Christmas, and I was working at the time on The World is Flat. And I not slept well the night before, and serendipity being what it is, I badly needed a Starbucks. And I went to the Starbucks at the base of Aspen Mountain, and as I was waiting in line, there was this guy sitting at a table with another of our friends and his lovely wife Maria, who's here tonight. And I don't know, one of them said, "That's Tom Friedman, I think I'll say hello." And I don't know, I just came over, sat down with them. What do you do? What do you do? What are you working on? What are you working on? And we just started talking. And we decided to take the lift ride from the bottom of Aspen Mountain to the top, up together. It's 18 minutes. And in those 18 minutes, Dov and I discovered we had been separated at birth. And we have been fast friends ever since. But what we really discovered in those 18 minutes, that the book I was working on, The World is Flat, was in some ways the base, the foundation on which he built his book, How, and really made it so relevant. And as soon as we connected on that, we really could not, much to the chagrin of Maria and my wife and my daughters, stop talking. And we've been talking ever since. So let me invite you to join our conversation on the lift ride up. Because what I told Dov when I heard about his work and his company was, so I'm working on this book called The World is Flat. And the argument at its simplest is that what flattened the world was the convergence of three basic things. The first was the fact that for the first time in the history of the world, men and women, thanks to the PC, the personal computer, men and women could author their own content in digital form. Now that sounds like a bunch of gobbledygook, I know. Men and women have authored their own content ever since they could etch on cave walls. But with the personal computer, what the PC did was allow us as individuals to author our own content, that is words, stories, data, spreadsheets, software, music, video. We could author all those things on a PC in digital form, in the form of bits and bytes. And when your content was in digital form, suddenly you could send it to so many more places. Well, that PC, shortly after, coincided with another invention, and that was the internet. And the wiring of the world with fiber optic cable. There were a lot of bad things about the dot-com bubble. A lot of people lost money in it. But one of the great things about the dot-com bubble was we made a massive, ridiculous, absurd, utterly outrageous overinvestment in fiber optic cable. And without anybody planning it, we accidentally wired Beijing, Bangalore, Brooklyn, and the Bronx all together. So all those people who just got their PCs and were authoring their content in digital form suddenly had an internet, a set of pipes, where they could send their content anywhere in the world virtually for free. And then came along the third thing I call workflow software. Workflow software, in my lingo, is simply the compilation of all those transmission protocols, all that alphabet soup that you see on websites, HTML, HTTP, XML, AJAX, SOAP, all that alphabet soup, you don't need to know what any of it means. All you need to know is what it did was something that our kids don't remember. They don't know how revolutionary it did. It was a quiet revolution. But I can see you out there, and you look more my age. And what you remember is when you first got email, your wife got CompuServe, and you got AOL, and they didn't connect. What that whole alphabet soup of transmission protocols did was make every computer and software program in the world interoperable. That was a revolution. Suddenly I could sit in Bethesda, Maryland, where I live, and communicate with someone in Bangalore where they lived over this internet without thinking for a minute, what computer am I on? A Mac or a PC? What computer are they on? What software are they running? What software am I running? Now you put all three of those together, and you basically have the genesis of the flat world. Suddenly, in a space of about a decade, more people could communicate with more other people in more ways about more stuff for less money faster than ever before. That's what flattened the world. It made us all collaborators. Now, off that platform, a whole new set of other flatteners emerged. One is outsourcing. One was offshoring. But the one that's most relevant to Dov's work is something I call uploading. It was a term coined by Kevin Kelly, the founder of Wired. What that platform allowed us to do as individuals was to upload our content and globalize it. Now, the most famous and the first form of uploading was open source software. A bunch of geeks sitting at home in their basement, writing operating systems and uploading them and sharing them with the world. And then along came Wikipedia. Suddenly the people started writing their own dictionary, encyclopedia, and uploading the content to the world. And then there was YouTube. Suddenly people started uploading their videos. Then there was blogging. Suddenly I'm competing with the whole world about opinion writing overnight. And then handheld cell phone cameras came along, and everyone suddenly was a paparazzi. Now, in a world where everyone is a potential newspaper columnist, a blogger, everyone is a potential paparazzi who has a cell phone with a camera, and everyone is a potential filmmaker with YouTube, in that world, everyone else is a public figure. You, me, the next person. And if you're really a public figure, through your work, whether in business or entertainment or media or government, it's really scary out there. Now, I discovered this, and it was one of the first stories I told Dov. I was teaching a course at Harvard several years back while I was working on this book with actually Larry Summers, when he was still president of Harvard. And one day I was coming home from Boston's Logan Airport, and I was by myself, and I went to buy some magazines at the newsstand in Logan Airport. And I walked over to the counter to pay for the magazines I bought, and there was a woman coming from another direction. Honestly, I thought I got there first. I put my money down in my magazines, and she said, "Excuse me, I was here first." And she looked at me, "I know who you are." If that would happen today, I would say, "Ma'am, can I buy your magazines? Can I shine your shoes? Can I buy you lunch? Just don't blog about me, take my picture, don't upload me on YouTube, and please, please don't do a blog and send it around the world that Tom Friedman butted in line." Suddenly, we live in a world that is so transparent. You don't just have to be Tiger Woods. You don't have to be a columnist for the New York Times. Now it's in schools, it's in junior highs, people blogging about each other. And so I'm riding up on the lift with this guy, and he tells me, "I'm writing a book called How." Because in this utterly transparent world that is so connected, where everybody has the power to author their own content and send it globally, how you live your life matters more now than ever, because so many people can now see into your life, tell other people about your life in ways no ad agency or marketing firm can protect you from. So, Dov, how did you get to how?
I need a couch, I'm in the inspiring principled performance business. I've always felt that behavior need not be like playing goalkeeper. Every soccer team wants to have the best goalie in the world, and they tell the goalie, stand over there and make sure that you don't give up any goals. Believe playing to us, because everybody wants to kick the ball and score goals. And I think that how we behave is part of how we advance and get to where we want to go. And I've always had this optimistic view of behavior that we need not associate it with managing risk and the downside, and that behave is what we tell a kid right after he misbehaved. Behave yourself. But why not outbehave? Why not see that behavior could be a source of competitive advantage? So how was born from that idea? It became more resonant in this flat world that you describe. And its first order of resonance was, in a world in which nothing stays hidden, we ought to act as though we have nothing to hide. Everybody's a paparazzi. But more importantly, the flat world is not just a transparent world, it's a connected world. And if the only reason one of you works at your company is what they pay you, you should leave if someone pays you more. If the only reason you buy from a company is the price of the product, then you should switch your loyalties if someone undercuts them. Tom, in a connected world, we're exposing the nature of our connections. Are they loose? Are they superficial? Are they transactional? Are they here and now? Or are they deep? Are they meaningful? Are they sustainable and lasting? So in a connected world, we are all in search of deeper forms of connection. In a connected world, those of us and those companies that make the deepest connections get to win. How we relate to others, how we consistently say what we mean what we say, and follow through. How we engender trust in our relationships so we can have tight collaborations. How we say I'm sorry is this deep source of connection.
Do you have examples of that, Dov? That you've seen in your research?
Let me give you some examples. There's a guy right here in New York City who was observed to sell 3 times the donuts against his competitor, who was kitty corner. They had the same donut. It was equally fresh and delicious. If it were not, in a flat world, one guy could cross the street, buy one of his donuts, reverse engineer it, and make it equally delicious. What he did is he put a tray on top of his stand, and he said to his customers, make your own change. I trust you. I'm going to focus on serving you, connecting with you, but I'm not going to stand over you and count change. That was the only difference. Now, that connection, he innovated in how he extended trust. People lined up. And if someone were to cheat, they'd say, not here, buddy, you're ruining a good party. Here's another example. How is about behavior, but behavior comes from values. The Sopranos had values that we don't agree with, but they had a code. People understood loyalty and accountability and what would happen to you if you didn't behave. Our issue with the Sopranos are the values. What values are we talking about? Rules and carrots and sticks applied to rules tell us what we can and can't do. How is about what we should do? You know, doctors get sued all over the country, more than anybody, for malpractice. And in the University of Michigan health systems, doctors said, what business are we in? We're going to connect with patients and make them healthier. And when we make a mistake, we're going to say we're sorry. They started to routinely apologize, and their lawsuits went down by 50%, as did their malpractice claims.
They would apologize for mistakes they'd made.
They apologized for mistakes. When they didn't believe authentically they made them, they fought them. But when they honestly believed they made a mistake, they apologized. I'll give you the best story. I once landed in Las Vegas, and I was there and I was on a Southwest Airlines flight. It's an airline that I admire for their culture, how they inspire principled performance in their people. When we landed, the flight attendant got on the loudspeaker and said, listen, all of you, we have done research in Southwest Airlines that if you cross your seatbelt before you deplane, one over the other, you're going to have luck at the tables. So we looked at each other, and then we all did it. Now, there is a federal regulation that the next plane can't take off until you cross seatbelts. So through how she behaved, she got us to help her do her job by complying with the federal regulation. Southwest Airlines also turns their planes around 6 minutes faster than their nearest rival. So through her behavior, they're more efficient. They also have a set of values: home on time, no frills, fun, and safe. And she lived those values in that experience. That is an example of out-behaving the competition. If you go into the Oxford or Webster's dictionary and you type in out-drink, out-dance, outperform, outsmart, outfox, outmaneuver, and so on, these are all words. And the reason they're words is they've met the standard of inclusion in the dictionary. They are part of common vernacular because they commonly describe how we think and how we behave. The word outbehave is not yet a word. The very idea that excellence can attach to behavior, that we can use behavior to achieve excellence, that we can use our behavior as a source of competitive advantage is new. And I think that in a connected, flat world, I think that idea is at the center of what the future is going to look like.
Can you think of any company, Dov, in the current financial crisis that has survived and thrived because it actually outbehaved its competitors?
In the financial sector itself?
Or generally. Yeah, I mean, if there's someone in the financial sector, that'd probably be a miracle, but I mean, outside of their, anybody who's sort of standing today, what would be examples of companies that have won by actually outbehaving their competition?
So no one has won yet. I don't know of many companies who
thrived,
who aren't suffering. Southwest Airlines is clearly one of them.
That's a good example.
But the real point is, every company says, listen, we want you to have a relationship with us because we stand for something. In the 80s and 90s, companies said, we stand for excellence. We answer the phone on 2 rings. We have the best products, the better, faster, cheaper mousetrap. If you look at commercials today or read the newspapers, Chevron is now the human energy company. Dow is the human element company. Cisco is the human network. Toyota is humanizing transportation. Ally Bank says, we speak human. Companies are saying, have a relationship with us because deep down we're not shallow. We're human beings. We stand for something.
And we can see inside you now.
Well, the connected world allows people to see deep inside. I mean, the philosopher Heraclitus said character is destiny. That's always been true of individuals. When Leona Helmsley said only little people pay taxes in this town, she got a few more years in jail for saying that. Mm-hmm. But we have never imputed character to a company. And the reason we can now impute character to a company is we can see deep into a company. And what is how? How things really happen around this place. A company has a character, its culture, how decisions get made, how information flows, how we do what we do. Because there's no manual in Southwest Airlines that commands that individual to behave the way she did. And when she flies and lands in Phoenix, she'll be inspired to invent a new way to connect with us because gambling doesn't take place in Phoenix and so on. So the reason I've skirted your question so far is, it used to be that we thought that we were going to compete on quality. And we started losing in business to the Japanese. And we didn't like it. We stood at the end of assembly lines and played goalkeeper. We inspected for defective products before we sent them out there because we cared about our customers. The Japanese designed quality into the very fabric and DNA of their companies. And when we started losing, we said, let's first declare quality job 1. Then we said it's not about quality, it's about American productivity and winning. And then it took us 10 to 15 years to start measuring quality defects to infinitesimal levels. I think we are just at the beginning of declaring that our human, social, and environmental values are job 1. And the next 10 to 15 years, companies will invent what thriving looks like by outbehaving the competition.
Well, before we go to sort of the next area, which is how this applies to the environmental world, I think it is appropriate here to ask you about, someone who's in the middle of this firestorm right now. And it really is appropriate, and that is Tiger Woods. Accenture, one of his biggest clients who plastered his image in every airport in the world. Yep. You see it in Europe, you see it in Asia. Under the logo, be a tiger, be like Tiger. Announced today they're dropping him. So, Dov, if IMG, Tiger's managers, had called you 2 weeks ago and said, Mr. Seidman, we know you run an ethics company, and a story is about to break in the National Enquirer that could be not only detrimental but lethal to our client, Tiger Woods, what would you have said to them?
So many things, right? Don't you understand the world you're living in? I mean, if everybody's a paparazzi, I mean, there are websites out there like TMZ. They live for this day. I mean, they're going to thrive in this world when Tiger loses his footing in this world. And what Tiger didn't understand, and what no one understands, is that you can't manage your reputation in this world. You can only earn it, one behavior, one good behavior at a time. And I wish that Tiger hung out with someone that I wrote about in my book, In How, on the golf tour, named David Toms. David Toms is a great golfer. He doesn't
Won a PGA,
but he doesn't strike the ball the way Tiger does. But I think he's going to have a more sustainable career. Let me illustrate. He was competing for the British Open, and on the 17th Roadhouse hole, he putted the ball and then followed his ball to the hole, and then he tapped it in, and he handed in his card. And he went back to his hotel room, and he couldn't sleep all that well at night. He had some dissonance and friction in his mind because there's a rule in golf that says if the ball is not at a complete standstill, you're not allowed to hit it again. And he had some vision that maybe the ball was wobbling. And he didn't sleep well. So the next day he comes and he goes to the rules tent. Literally, they are rules judges. And they all hover and they watch the video together. And David Toms says, do I need to disqualify myself? And the rules judges say, you can stay or you can go. It's inconclusive. And he disqualified himself because he's a how person. He could stay, he could go. But what he should do is disqualify himself. And he said that he wants to live a life of significance. And the next time he brings himself to the ball, he wants to be continuous with his values. Had Tiger hung around with him, we wouldn't be posing the question to his PR firm. Tactically speaking, here's what I would say to Tiger. Obviously, we've been on your website. There's a picture of you, your wife, 2 kids, and 2 dogs. You're holding yourself out at $100 million a year to be this type of person. Putting morality aside, this person has nothing to do with that person, and we had a relationship with this person, and you're turning out to be that person. You owe everybody an apology. But it shouldn't be a faceless apology, a letter that they draft on his behalf on the website. It should be a real one in this world of YouTube. We should see his pain, we should see his anguish, and we should see some repentance and remorse. So a real apology is more specific, and I would not have hunkered down. I would have come out right away. A real apology, a personal one, and then say, obviously, it's not lost on me that what I did is deeply troubling to so many, and I need to figure this out. So with this real apology, just give me some space. But until he does that, he's not going to get the space.
Do you think if he does that, given what you know about how, and when you think about his case, it has everything. Text messages, YouTube video, paparazzi's cell phone cameras, email messages. He is the true biggest victim of the flat world, in this realm. Do you think there's any saving him, Dov? We're forgiving people, Kobe Bryant.
We are.
There have been Bill Clinton, after all. We are people, we're forgiving people. Can he get his hows right enough, do you think, to revive his career? Or we just care how he drives the ball and putts the ball?
Well, I think that the connected world, we don't get to go to funerals anymore and say he was a jerk in the office, but a loving husband, etc. Life is continuous. We are one person wherever we find ourselves. We cannot compartmentalize our lives.
Why is that?
Why is that? Because just like a politician can't go from one audience to the next and pander, and just like a quack doctor can't go to the next town and start over again, in a connected world, your reputation gets there before you get there. And that's just the way it is. Every one of us has written a resume. In the prior world, we each reduced our life story to 1 page, and we controlled our story. We showed up at a job interview and said, you know what we're going to talk about? What I put on my page, which is why we polished our resume over and over again. When I hire people, I Google them before they get here. We can look at MySpace and Facebook and see what people say about them. The amount of insight we can get into people more efficiently than they're reading their resume is infinite. So in a world in which we can't control our story,
We're leaving digital footprints everywhere.
everywhere, and they are never erased. So in a world in which we can't control our story, what can we control? How we live our lives and how we conduct our business. I mean, McDonald's used to control its story. It would say, we're great. We serve billions of people. We must be. And now they're having a conversation about trans fats and childhood obesity and transparency about nutritional requirements, and in addition to burgers, their Happy Meals. To connect with society, they have to do that much more, and that's the world we're in. In terms of, we are forgiving people, and there's a lot Tiger can do that will be forgivable. What strikes me as different in this case, I mean, in Los Angeles, when Kobe Bryant, we had an image of him in Los Angeles as being this type of person. He clearly transgressed. But there was something about the transgression that was still in his sphere. This is so different than anything any of us ever felt about Tiger Woods. He was an icon of a family man, of perfection in some ways, that this behavior almost reconstitutes in our mind who he is. So which Tiger are we going to forgive? I'm not sure. I think he's got work to do to figure out who he is and then give us the chance to have a relationship with that person. He can come back and say, all I am is unidimensional. I hit a golf ball better than anybody else. Let's have a relationship on that basis. Or I want to have a more holistic life, and I have a lot of work to do, so give me a chance. Here's how I'm going to live it.
I think that's good advice. So 2 winters ago, I started working on a new book, Hot, Flat, and Crowded. And one of our traditions is we get together at Dov's house for breakfast one morning, and I'm again telling them what I'm working on. And once again, even though this book was on environment and ecology and energy, it actually connected up to Dov's work. And it was actually his wife, Maria, who coined the phrase, well, Dov and I got so excited about out-behaving as a way of gaining sustainable advantage, she came up with the term out-greening, and why out-greening actually can and will be a source of competitive advantage. So I worked that into my book, but let me just sort of back into it and tell you how, and why Dov's message, I feel, actually applies to the environmental world as well. So Hot, Flat, and Crowded came out a little over a year ago. It came out, I think, about 10 days before Lehman Brothers was put out of business. And I was doing okay book sales until then. And then suddenly this became the biggest story in the world, rightfully so, the whole financial crisis. So I kind of watched all this go by during the last year as I was out talking about my book. And I gradually realized that there was a real parallel between the financial crisis and the environmental crisis. And in fact, I eventually realized that they were flip sides of the same coin in terms of behavior. And so what I did for the paperback was throw out basically the whole front of Hot, Flat, and Crowded as I originally wrote it in hardback. And I rewrote the entire front of the book, the first 3 chapters, which are now called Why Citibank, Iceland's Banks, and the Ice Banks of Antarctica all melted at the same time. Or if you don't like that, Why Bear Stearns and the polar bear both faced extinction at the same time. And the basic argument was this, that I think in time we will look back at the year 2008 and 2009 and understand that it was not just a financial crisis. It was actually a moment when both the market and Mother Nature said, stop. You are growing in a way that is unsustainable, that cannot be passed on to our children. It is unsustainable financially, and it is unsustainable ecologically. Well, what was this system? Well, in simple form, we were basically borrowing money to build more and more stores, to sell more and more stuff that would be made in more and more Chinese factories, powered by more and more coal, earning China more and more dollars, to buy more and more T-bills, to be recirculated back to America, to build more and more stores, to sell more and more stuff, to be made in more and more Chinese factories, powered by more and more coal, to earn more and more dollars, to buy more and more T-bills, to be recirculated back to America, to build more and more stores. That was the loop that we were in. And I would argue that 2008, 2009 was both an environmental crisis and a financial crisis. It was both the market and Mother Nature saying, this is your warning heart attack. You cannot continue growing with this model. It is unsustainable. Now, what the two models have in common is that they were both actually based on the exact same accounting. What were we doing in the market? In the market, we were allowing people to massively underprice the risk of subprime mortgages and the credit default swaps that backed them up. We allowed the people who issued those mortgages, who received those mortgages, and who issued those credit default swaps to privatize all their gains. And then when they blew up, we allowed them to socialize all the losses on you and me and all our neighbors in America. We allowed people to massively underprice risk, privatize gains, and socialize losses. We are doing the exact same accounting in the natural world. We allow people to massively underprice the risk of emitting carbon molecules. We allow them to, and all of us, privatize the gains, cheap coal-based electricity, cheap $2 a gallon gasoline. And we are socializing all the losses in the form of carbon emissions into the atmosphere, which we are charging on our children's Visa cards, which they will pay for in the future in the form of radical climate change. In both the market and Mother Nature, we are behaving the exact same way, allowing people to underprice risk, privatize gains, and socialize losses. And that is why Citibank, Iceland's banks, and the ice banks of Antarctica all melted in the same year. They were both being driven by the same process. And not only were we practicing the same accounting, but they were both based on the identical ethics. The ethics of what bankers call IBG and YBG. I'll be gone or you'll be gone. I sell you this subprime mortgage, even though I know you can't possibly, with your $20,000 salary, ever keep up the payments for this $500,000 home, but I'll be gone. And by the way, not to worry, home prices only go up. So if you have a problem, you will flip it and you'll be gone. I bundle these subprime mortgages into bonds and sell them to unsuspecting banks all over the world. No problem, I'll be gone. I'm Moody's. I rate these bonds AAA, even though I know they're full of garbage. No problem, I'll be gone. And your investment banks flips them to someone else, you'll be gone. At every stage of the process, we allowed people the ethics of I'll be gone or you'll be gone. And of course, we do the exact same thing in how we emit carbon. So the kind of meta-argument I'm making in the new front of this book is that our parents were the greatest generation. And they earned that title, greatest generation, because they built us a world of freedom and abundance. For our generation, my generation, unlike anything one generation has passed on to another. They defeated fascism in the Pacific, Nazism in Europe, the civil rights movement in America. They built us an incredible world of abundance. My generation, we've had our highs, we've had our ups, we've done some good things, but in the end, we turned out to be what my friend Kurt Anderson calls the grasshopper generation. We ate through it all like hungry locusts. Now our children and us, because we're still going to be here, we need to be the regeneration. We need to go from the greatest generation to the grasshopper generation to the regeneration. And what we need to do, what the regeneration has to be about, is bringing the ethic of sustainability, not just to the environment, but to the market. We need to, for our generation, make sustainability what freedom was to our parents' generation. What the pursuit and defense and propagation of freedom was for our parents, sustainability has to be for us. If it isn't, we will be more unfree than had the Soviet Union won the Cold War. Because the constraints that the market and Mother Nature will impose on us will actually make us more unfree than had the Soviets won the Cold War. As my friend Rob Watson always reminds me, and never forget, Mother Nature, she's just chemistry, biology, and physics. That's all she is. You can read about ClimateGate till the cows come home. But Mother Nature, she's just chemistry, biology, and physics, and she's going to do whatever chemistry, biology, and physics dictate. And as Rob always reminds me, Mother Nature, she always bats last, and she always bats 1,000. You can't spin her, you can't sweet talk her, you can't say, Mother Nature, we're having a financial crisis. Could you take a year off? No, she's just going to do what chemistry, biology, and physics dictate. And if we live by the ethics of IBG and YBG, and we get on the wrong side of chemistry, biology, and physics, she will impose constraints on us that will be so much worse than communism. The market's just greed and fear. That's all it is. It's the snapshot every millisecond of the balance between greed and fear around a stock, a bond, a currency, an equity, a piece of real estate. You can't spin it. You can't sweet talk it. It's going to do whatever greed and fear dictate. And if we get on the wrong side of that greed equation and tip into fear, it will put constraints on us that will be worse than had the Soviets won the Cold War. And therefore, the common answer to both is behaving in a sustainable way. And that means getting IBG and YBG out of your head. There is no I'll be gone. There is no you'll be gone. There is YBH, you will be here. And every interaction you make in the natural world and the financial world has to be based on the notion of sustainability. You and I are going to have a sustainable relationship. I'm not going to lay this bond off on someone else, and I'm not going to lay this carbon off on someone else. I'm going to behave as though I will always be here. So as I talked about this with my friend Dov, he came up with I thought, a really interesting framework. He said, Tom, there are two kinds of values in the world. Sustainable values, the way we just described, you will always be here, and situational values. Situational values say, situationally, as my bank, I could actually give out mortgages to people who could never pay them back because situationally I can flip them to someone else. Sustainable behavior would tell me to never do that. Situationally, I could plow up part of the Amazon, plant soybeans, and make a fortune selling them to China. Situationally, I can now do that. Sustainability, sustainable values would tell me I should never do that. Dov, I need your help going forward now in thinking through this issue. It's easier for me to say I need to behave in a sustainable way in the financial world and in the environmental world. But what does that actually mean? As I asked you on the lift one day, what does it mean to behave sustainably? I need a checklist.
There are no 7 habits of highly sustainable people.
That's what you told me, and
it can't be reduced to a checklist. It's a frame of mind. It's an ethic. It's a philosophy. It's looking at our relationships through a new lens, a long-term lens. But let me just back up before I go forward. When the dinosaurs went extinct, they had an excuse. A comet slapped into the earth, kicked up so much dust, photosynthesis was inhibited, and so on, and the rest we know. We have not had a comet hit our Earth. In large and small ways, how we've behaved has made the financial crisis and the climate crisis and many other challenges we face existential for us because of our behavior. And that just is what it is. And sustainability is not over there with the recycling bins associated with environmentalism. Let's ask some fundamental questions. What makes my friendship with you sustainable? How I treat you, and how you treat me. Are we adding value to each other's lives? What makes the relationship between a leader and her followers sustainable? How inspiring that leader is.
We'll talk about that for a second. You talk about inspirational leadership for a country or a corporate leader.
Right.
How does that relate to sustainability?
Okay. So if I take the word situational relationships are governed through carrots and sticks, right? Get me the memo by 5 o'clock. Just get it done, I don't care how. My way or the highway, fireable offenses. We can connect to people situationally through sticks. Another way to connect with someone is a carrot. If you do this, you'll get paid this much. Here's your discount. And we tend to set up structures and frameworks of behavior that are carrots and sticks applied against laws and regulations or internal company policies, etc. We're in a recession. There are fewer carrots to go around. They're a commodity, and if I give you 8 carrots, you're going to give me 8 parts motivation. If someone comes up with 9 carrots, you'll be even more motivated. We have seen the limitations of carrots and sticks, coercing and motivating people to behave a certain way. It's no different than putting a guardrail up in the bowling alley and keeping the ball out of the gutter. But there's nothing in a carrot and stick that can propel and guide you to the strike zone. Inspiration is totally different. It's not motivation on steroids. When you are motivated or coerced, you're acting on an external stimuli. When you are inspired, you're acting from within. You're propelled by values you deem to be fundamental to who you are. You're in the grip of beliefs that matter to you. You're pursuing a mission worthy of your dedication and talent. And you're enlisted in a vision that's larger than yourself. Situational values are about carrots and sticks. Sustainable relationships are approaching people from the standpoint of inspiration. We are going to connect in the deepest way possible. We're going to share values, we're going to share beliefs, and we are going to pursue something together. I think the 21st century is about behavior, and leadership is about inspiration, the ability to tap into people's belief systems. I think we need some sticks, we need some guardrails, we need some carrots. People should be paid a fair wage and then some. But in addition to that, we need to introduce inspiration into all of our relationships to make them sustainable. And what are the values that bind us deeply? Surely the list would include honesty, transparency, trust, mutual responsibility, the bedrock that allows anybody to pursue something with somebody else on a sustainable basis. The problem is, I can't pay you, Tom, for your integrity. I can't pay you for your integrity. I can only pay someone for the behaviors that someone with integrity can manifest. The work that's left to be done is leaders and companies have to translate their deepest commitments into observable, rewardable corporate practices and behaviors that we can repetitively do to make a difference and build value.
So let me put you on the spot. I saw an amazing movie last night, if you haven't seen it, Up in the Air. Which is about George Clooney plays a guy who his job is to be hired by companies to come in as an outsider and fire people. And a hotshot graduate young woman from Cornell comes along and says, I've got a much better idea. Let's do it remotely using the flat world. Let's use the web. And you put people in front of a computer camera and we can fire them remotely from an outsourcing center in our company's headquarters. And it's really an amazing movie, and it's about how George Clooney sort of rediscovers his humanity. You had to downsize your company recently, like so many, and we're going through right now in the New York Times. How did you handle it?
So we actually didn't downsize, we restructured. We were a company that And it's true, we were working with big companies, and we realized that in addition to educating millions of people around the world around doing the right things, they wanted more from us. And it's no different than a hospital having too many cardiovascular surgeons and not enough pediatrics. So we assembled our company and we said, we need to find a way to have more impact and bring more value to our clients around the world. And I spoke to the whole company. It was utterly transparent. Here is everybody that's going to be leaving, and we are going to be hiring back into the company different people who are going to be doing new jobs. But then it came down to how are we going to do it?
How?
We put all the cards on the table, and then we decided that because we made the decision, I couldn't hide behind, we're doing this because it's a recession and I have no choice. Because I knew that we decided to negatively impact people, we needed to take responsibility. And for a small company, minimum severance was 3 months. Some people got 6 or more. No one was walked out of the building. Everybody had at least 2 weeks transition or more. So 2 weeks plus severance. We had company meetings where we discussed our future. And then we did surveys, and we let everybody fill out these surveys, including the people leaving, and we asked them, how do you think we did it? Then when we handed them their severance, we said, you don't need to sign anything. Now, our law firm called me up, our labor and employment counsel called up, and they insisted on meeting with me because they felt I lost my mind. You cannot let go of 63 people and give them money, and as a quid pro quo, not insist that they sign documents that they won't sue you, right?
No non-compete?
Nothing. We said, we're going to extend trust to you, and we just gave the money on the honor system and never asked them to sign anything. And then as a final step, we gathered our company and we said, we are restructuring. We're going through an enormous amount of pain. This must be gut-wrenching. So we're losing some dear colleagues who gave us a lot of their dedication and commitment. If anybody at this company wishes they were on the list of people leaving, we are going to give you a similar package because we don't want you to stay just because by default you didn't make it on the list. We want that to be a commitment. We want you to be inspired. So we ask people to take the weekend and come back and tell us if they want to stay or go. But we needed to put our money where our mouth is. So we said, if you decide to leave, we'll pay you some severance on a transition. So we weren't perfect, but if we didn't approach it through the lens of sustainability, we might have done it a lot worse. And so far it seems to have united us and propel us forward.
We've got questions here, and I'm going to go through them. But just before we do, I'm going to take the prerogative and say, if you were advising Lloyd Blankfein at Goldman Sachs on how to handle his situation, what would you have told him?
You know, it's interesting because President Obama tomorrow is going to be meeting with bankers. And he said, I think yesterday, that he didn't become president to help fat cats in any way get fatter, some version of that. You know, when you tell a child, don't eat like a pig, you're shaming the child. You're saying you're doing something beneath that which a human being does. That's actually a very inspirational thing to do. See, because we think inspiration is always about elevating people. Go above and beyond. Shaming somebody is a values-based way of treating them. Based on a value of what an honorable, responsible human being would do, you have now acted beneath that. That's what calling someone a fat cat is. I think that when carrots and sticks run their course and you can't show up, and the way TARP was designed, it turns out that TARP was designed in a way that we really can't get these bankers to just start lending the way we wanted them to. Not enough carrots, not enough sticks, or they're limited. Shame is okay. It's a very inspirational thing to do. And what I would tell Lloyd Blankfein is you're about to get shamed. Now, we did a lot of good with the cessation of smoking when we stigmatized the activity of blowing smoke in someone's face and otherwise hurting yourself. Once we stigmatized it, laws and regulations helped reinforce that. I think what's happening between us and Wall Street is an act of shaming them, saying you've disconnected from fundamental values, you extracted more money and value from the economy than enlarging the pie that would benefit us all. Of course, you shouldn't take oversized bonuses right around now. But more importantly, in addition to not just taking bonuses now, instead of putting them aside and taking more bonuses next year, let's shift the conversation from how much. Because if all this is about the size of bonuses, we're leaving it up to our individual aesthetic sensibilities as when is it too much. Why don't you lead and tell us what should you earn bonuses for? And I think we need to shift the conversation from how much to what for. I think that nobody in this country begrudges anybody for making a lot of money if they made it the right way for the right things. And I think Wall Street has an opportunity to come forward and say, if we do A, B, and C, if we stop acting like the financial industry, creating, through euphemism, products, and go back to what the name used to be, a financial services industry, and we don't just have counterparties, but we serve customers, and we either safeguard their money or through our innovation help them create value, then please pay me a lot for doing that. But if all I do is innovate through my financial engineering and I outsmart the competition by hiring mathematical geniuses to create risk models and use my brain to get ahead as opposed to my behavior, then for that I deserve to be shamed. And I would say you have an amazing opportunity, Mr. Blankfein, to lead. People look at you and Goldman Sachs as an iconic institution. The game is up. When 40% of a country's corporate profits are in Wall Street, we're lopsided. I actually wrote something for Business Week as to why I want the recession not to end just yet. Of course, the pain and suffering is terrible, and we need to work through that. But we need 4 to 5 to 6 years of people graduating college and not going to Wall Street so that we can go to ET, which you call environmental technology, and healthcare and education to really get our groove back, a word that you use. So I actually think that we need some time to create new habits and start to create not just new jobs so we don't just try to bring the old ones back.
Very helpful.
That would be my advice.
We're going to go to questions here. I've got one at the top here. I believe tax incentives are necessary to motivate Americans to place solar panels on their roofs. When will the government provide the necessary incentives? Well, that's a good question. Actually, the government is already providing incentives in the bill that was passed last year. In fact, our government has been providing incentives for putting solar panels on your roof or investing in solar ever since Jimmy Carter was president. And they would provide them for 1 or 2 years, and then they'd stop them. And then they'd provide them for 1 or 2 years, and then they'd stop them. Then they'd provide them for 1 or 2 years, and then they'd stop them. Now, if you actually study the history of this, you'll know that when it comes to coal incentives or nuclear incentives or the oil depletion allowance, it doesn't go for 24 months. Only when it came to renewable energy did the Congress dole out incentives as though it was actually coming out of the pockets of the legislators themselves. The whole history of America's solar and wind industry, all this technology was invented in America, and all was commercialized in Japan and Europe. Because unlike the United States, Germany has a feed-in tariff. If you put a solar panel on your roof, your utility has to buy it at a no-brainer profit for you for 20 years. And that's why today, Germany, which doesn't even, I don't think the sun even shines in Germany. Germany today is the fastest growing solar market in the world. And there has been a shortage of silicon to make solar photovoltaic cells for the last year because so much of it has been going to Germany. So that's really been the problem. We've had to have these incentives, but they're stop and start. And as all the businessmen and women in the audience will know, there's no way you can plan a business, plan investments, when the government doles out incentives and stops them once every 2 or 3 years. Dov, you got one there?
Well, I've got one that says, what did you and President Obama talk about while playing golf? So I do not play golf with the president, so that one's for you, Tom.
That one I'll pass on. But I will pass on that. It is interesting, I will say one thing, that because it's apropos I don't think this is talking out of school, I think it's a public record. President Obama plays golf with a few exceptions, and very few. He plays golf with his staff. And I don't mean his senior staff. He plays golf with his advanced guys, basically, and gals. So he got criticized for not bringing enough of them in. For previous presidents, golf was kind of an extension of the Lincoln bedroom. It's the way you schmooze people. You brought in fat cats, donors, and whatnot. One thing I always sensed about President Obama, not just from having seen him on the golf course, although playing golf with someone for 5 hours pretty much tells you everything you need to know. He can take rich people or leave them. He's not one who particularly enjoys the company of fat cats. He plays golf with his staff. Tells me a lot.
Go ahead.
Dov, this is for you. Is it difficult or even impossible to inculcate quality and behavioral values in a company if the people who run the company lack the values and ethics?
It's impossible. They say the fish rots from the head, right? Tone at the top, people don't want people to just proclaim and assert their values. I mean, in the 80s and 90s, you said we were about excellence. If you didn't have enough excellence, you could show up next year and say our excellence scores are up. If you say we're about integrity, you can't say next year I'm going to get myself a little bit more integrity. You either have it or you don't. And I think that in this world where behavior matters so much, many leaders and companies have crossed the Rubicon. They've told their people that please have a relationship with me because I stand for something. If they don't, there's nowhere the company can go. Now, I want to express some sympathy for leaders. Tom Coughlin had to have the courage to change. The 4 other Super Bowl coaches who've won in the last 4 years don't scream at their players, and they never did. Tony Dungy and Mike Tomlin. There's an up-and-coming group of leaders who understand that in a connected world, you can't have power over people, you can only have power through people. And the people in charge today need to go on a transformational journey like Tom Coughlin because leadership is about power. It's true in politics, it's true in government, it's true in companies. Now, in the year 1300, who had the power? Those who had land, because the more land I have, the more rent I could charge you to farm on my land. So we went to war for land. We divided and conquered for land. We built castles and moats on our land because I was powerful relative to you if I had more of something relative to you. In the industrial age, the more capital I have, the more interest I could charge you if I lend you some. So we doubled down on the command and control and divide and conquer habits of power. We began to think that everything is zero-sum. We are now in an age where information and knowledge are the source of power. They're not finite, they're infinite. Google gives them away for free. So I can no longer hoard something and have more of you. So I can't have power over you. But these are deeply ingrained habits that came over the ages. People in power today have power over people. That's why they govern their companies. Everybody has a span of control of 8 people, plus or minus 2. They take swaths of work and they break it down into small bite sizes. They give everybody a job description and a few carrots to do that job day in, day out, and they don't ask people to be cathedral builders. They say, your job is to lay brick, but we won't tell you what this brick is adding up to because only managers can understand the big picture. And these are deep habits. And then they declare that their favorite book in the 90s is The Art of War. They literally think business is war. So I think we're going on a transformational journey of power over to power through. This is true in a hot, flat, and crowded world. The more oil I have, I can out-pump you. The more agricultural land I have, the more I can out-produce you. Mm-hmm. If I have more trees or mines, I can outstrip you. And I think that where we have a future is in human energy. The ability through inspiration to produce an infinite amount of ideas and put them to practice. But CEOs and leaders need to create corporate cultures that bring out the best in people so that they can do that.
Well, it does remind me, again, about we really didn't finish the point about outgreening, which really came out of this discussion and that we had over breakfast because, one of my whole approach to this whole green issue to climate gate and all this stuff out there is, there's one place in the world, ladies and gentlemen, where they're not having the climate gate debate at all. That's China. China, they're not having a climate debate. And it's not because they read Al Gore or Rachel Carson or anybody else. It's because they looked around and realized that they cannot breathe, cannot swim, cannot fish, cannot drink, and cannot drive. And their biggest glaciers, the water towers of Asia, the glaciers of the Himalayas, are shrinking and affecting the great rivers of the Mekong Delta and the Yangtze and the Pearl River Delta. They know what's going on. They don't need to read some idiot op-ed piece by Sarah Palin in the Washington Post telling them that climate change isn't happening. They know what's going on. And they also know something else. I'm an opinion columnist. I can say whatever I want. Okay. They also know something else, that out-greening is going to be a source of tremendous political and strategic advantage. And I actually learned about out-greening from a Marine commander in Iraq. Marine commander, after a year of the war, called back to the Pentagon one day and said, I need solar energy. Solar energy, they said. General, you gone a little green out there in the sun? You need solar energy? You gone a little girly man on us? You need solar energy? He said, look, you morons, it's like this. I'm trucking diesel fuel to run my electric generators to the 10 bases I oversee on the Iraq-Syria border. I'm trucking it from the Kuwait-Iraq border across Iraq at $20 a gallon fully delivered. That's for the trucking, the military protection, and that's if al-Qaeda doesn't blow them up along the way. If I had solar energy to run my generators at my distributed bases, I wouldn't have to truck any fuel. I could out-green al-Qaeda. And the chapter in my book is called Out-Greening Al-Qaeda, because that same advantage applies to so many businesses and industries today. After all, there's two components in any source of energy. There's your variable cost and there's your fixed cost. Your fixed cost is what it costs you to build the energy source, and your variable cost is the cost of the fuel, the coal, the oil, the uranium. But in the case of wind and solar, once you build the fixed facility, your variable cost is zero. And in the long term, in a hot, flat, and crowded world, to know the cost of your fuel and to know that your variable cost will be zero, that will be a huge source, I would argue, of competitive advantage. Hence, out-greening your competition in the long run is going to be, I think, a strategically important source of competitive advantage.
Yeah. Before I read this question, I wanted to ask you, I watched on Charlie Rose, you said that American CEOs and American business leadership has been AWOL. What did you mean by that?
Well, it was part of a larger point I was trying to make, Dov, about why our government doesn't work anymore. Our government seems only capable of producing suboptimal solutions to our biggest problems today. And I've been asking myself, how long can we have a government that can produce only suboptimal solutions to its biggest problems when our chief rival in the world, a country called China, whose government is made principally of engineers, can actually order, through authoritarian means, from the top down, optimal solutions to how it spends its stimulus, to how it moves into clean tech. How long can we go on with a government that can only produce suboptimal solutions? So what I was doing with Charlie was ticking off, how did we get to this point? And it seems to me we got to this point where our government really is not working at a deep fundamental level for a variety of reasons. First is that money in politics is out of all control. It is out of all control. I would argue Washington, D.C. today, the way it works is nothing more than legalized bribery. Really, the system today is really a form of legalized bribery. It's really who comes, with the most cash on any issue. The second is that gerrymandering of political districts has gotten so scientific, thanks to Google Maps and computers, that, as they say, voters no longer choose their politicians. Politicians now choose their voters. Down to the household. I mean, it's down to, that house has, 2 Republicans in it, and that one has 1 Democrat and 1 Republican. We'll move them over into our district. It is almost that finely grained. What that means is more and more districts are just Republican or Democrat. And what that means is that the primary is the only election. The battle between Republicans or battle between Democrats. And what that means is that fewer and fewer politicians are sent to Washington with any inbuilt instinct, desire, or necessity to appeal to voters on the other side. And so as you start to get a Washington, D.C. that's just full of those people, at the legislative level, you have a prescription for paralysis. Well, the media, and this is the third point, the cable news system that we have today and the internet is creating the same thing among voters. So now I can get my news from the exact right-wing website, left-wing website, centrist website that absolutely fits my stereotype. I never have to think about, be exposed to, or reach out to news from the other side of the aisle. And we see this mirrored today in cable news, and we see it mirrored on websites. At the same time, the internet, which is a great institution for adding voices, for challenging hierarchies and taking down establishments, at its best, that same internet is also capable of producing digital lynch mobs that if you get outside the orthodoxy of any particular political group in this country, they will come after you with a ferocity that is truly scary. And that is inhibiting the debate. Add on that, we have a permanent presidential campaign now. Sarah Palin is running against Barack Obama right now, as is Mitt Romney, as is Pawlenty. We now have a permanent presidential campaign. Not just now, we had it when George Bush was president as well. That's certainly, in the old days, we used to speak about the first 100 days of a president. Now it's the only 100 days. Now you have 100 days, basically. Then you're into the midterm, and then you're thinking about the 4 years out. So we've gone from the first 100 days to the only 100 days. And lastly, and this is where the point came in, Dov, about business. See, when the world is flat, what's happened is the big American multinationals, some of which I know you have to work with and have the opportunity to work with, but big American multinationals, they're actually not in America anymore. They just hover over America, okay? So IBM hovers over Armonk, and Intel hovers over Sunnyvale, and Microsoft hovers over Redmond. And what that means is when Microsoft asks Washington for more H-1B visas to get intellectual talent in from India or China, and Washington says no, Microsoft says no problem. We'll just open our newest research center in Vancouver, Canada. When Applied Materials, maybe the most important company in America you've never heard of, Applied Materials makes the machines that make the microchips that Intel sells. When Applied Materials can't sell any of its solar factories in America, no problem. They just opened their newest solar research center, the biggest privately funded solar research center in the world, on October 9th, was opened by Applied Materials in Xi'an, China. So what happens when the world is flat, instead of the business roundtable coming to Washington and saying, here's why we need free trade, here's why we need open markets, here's why we need a better education system, here's why we desperately need health care, so we can compete, and American workers and companies can compete with other countries that have health care. Instead of fighting that fight and taking on the Lou Dobbses of the world and people who really, I think, were trying to take us down a wrong path, instead of fighting for those principles, they just switch. It's so easy now, Dov, to just move somewhere else. So this whole constituency, that had an interest in American internationalism, in broad principles of, say, healthcare, competition, education, things that really affect our workforce, they're completely AWOL. in the debate. Has anyone seen them in the healthcare debate? Only time these people come to Washington now is to lobby for subsection 4, paragraph B, which applies to the repatriation of my income from Suriname, for this particular deal. Otherwise, they just hover, and they'll just go now where the least resistance is, and the least resistance is outside America.
Yeah.
Have a nice day.
Want to cover some more?
Dov, how is President Obama doing sticking to his value system, considering the troop surge in Afghanistan? He recently credited Martin Luther King for his position in the world while defending waging war, the opposite of nonviolence. It's an interesting question. How's he doing?
So obviously you know more about what's going on in Afghanistan than I do. I think
But this is really about inspirational leadership.
And I think he largely is one. But there's one more thing that inspirational leadership is about. I think that the Obama election he ran a how campaign. It was about how he was going to govern. It was all about pulling us together. It started in the speech, the red states versus blue states. It's just all the United States. And I think ever since he gave that speech, the ethic was one of unification, that we have bigger fish to fry. And I think we elected him. He was not that specific prior to being elected as to his policies. There weren't many what's on the table. So it was about how. Since he's been in office, you could take one of two views. Very tough to be about how. The problems are so many and so enormous that he just needs to put his shoulder against them and be a problem solver. But I think that there's been a lot of that. And let me talk internationally and then domestically. The one thing that I am not inspired by is a large vision. Where is America's moonshot? Where are we going?
You're missing that, or you're feeling it?
Not seeing it.
You're not seeing it.
In 1909, I don't know if Great Britain thought it was about to lose the empire several years later. It's 100 years later. I think the president needs to paint a picture for us of where we're going and what trajectory we need to be on. Or I worry about the country. And I think that, as you said, this financial crisis was a heart attack. But the heart attack for me is, what is the path to recovery? And it's hard to know where we're going. Asking the American people to come with me is easier when you tell them where they're going. So I think President Obama can paint a much larger vision, because all of these problems have something unifying them, from healthcare, etc. We need to be at our best, because I was just in China. They have something that we don't have. They have a 5,000-year culture that there's actually a proverb that laws control the lesser man, but right conduct control the greater man. And I think that they're figuring out that to participate in the world, they're going to tap into Confucian's culture and go forward. But in the meantime, there's a communist regime going top down, and it's going to combust. And their level of hunger is insatiable. And at best, we're ambitious. And hungry countries and hungry people eat ambitious people for lunch. So we got to get going. In terms of our president internationally, I think he's an inspirational leader, because you can't inspire without engaging. He's engaging. He's engaging the world. You know, words are actions. Saying certain things in certain parts of the world, in Cairo, etc., is an action. Now, you got to follow them up later, but I think it's a false dichotomy to say these are words and these are actions. Words can have real power to them if they're said by the right person at the right time, if you follow them up. The one thing that I've always known about values is living your values is often inconvenient. It's unpopular. It could be dangerous. It could be unprofitable. One way you know that you're living on your values is it feels that way. And I think that it was not a convenient decision that our president made to send more troops a week before he went to pick up his Nobel Prize. So I would extend trust to him and say he must believe deeply that it's the right thing to do, and we should get behind him.
Well, I would just pick up with what you said. Maybe we'll close here. That I couldn't agree more. I think that what President Obama's, I think, administration has lacked in its first year, and Lord knows the problems he had to confront, were staggering when he came in, but it lacks a narrative, something that ties together everything he's doing. And I think actually the narrative is there. It's actually hiding in plain sight. I think what he's trying to do, what we need to do, is what I call nation building at home. We need nation building in America today. And I think what unifies healthcare and energy policy and education policy and financial regulation and what we're trying to do in the world, particularly what we're doing domestically, is we are not who we think we are as a country. And we need nation building in America. And I think that is his vision. I think that is his calling. I think that's actually why we elected him. Yeah. But he hasn't quite pulled it together yet. And so he's finding himself having to defend each one of these initiatives in their niche, but he can't leverage the big thought on his behalf. And I think until he does that, he's going to have a problem. And unfortunately, a lot of us thought that just electing him was the moonshot of our generation, just electing him. And we did a lot of, look at us. Look how radical we are. We could elect an African American as president. And it was a remarkable thing. But given where we are as a country today and our desperate, crying need for nation building at home, it was actually just the beginning. Dov, it's great to be with you here. Please, go ahead, please.
Since I look at things through the lens of how, I'd like to share with you what I deem to be the ultimate how. And it comes from a philosophical paradox, the paradox of happiness. It turns out that when we pursue happiness, it tends to elude us. When we do things that bring meaning to our lives, when we're in the grip of ideas around which we're passionate, happiness tends to find us. I think there's a corollary to that in business, in politics, etc., and I call it the paradox of success. What we've lived through is the direct pursuit of success, conventionally defined.
The financial crisis.
Financial crisis and otherwise. And when you go at success, like happiness, it will elude you. When you pursue significance, when you do things that are other regarding, when you are truly trying to be sustainable, when you're trying to sustain relationships, do things of significance by adding value to the lives of others, I think success tends to find us. I think the United States, each of us, our companies, if we pursue significance, success will find us. There's Johnson & Johnson has a one-page credo. They've distilled everything they stand for in one page. General Johnson wrote it when he was the only shareholder. And he said, our first responsibility is to the doctors and patients of the world. And it goes on and on about responsibility to make the world a healthier place. And then this ethics document talks about money. And it says, if we live according to these principles, our shareholders should make a fair return, not will. It's one thing to do something of significance and be successful and make money, and to do it in order to make money. I think as a country, as individuals, and as companies, if we do things in order to make a difference, we can make money. But if we do them in order to make money, they will elude us. So I think the ultimate how is to pursue significance, and I think that that's what the United States has in its grasp. And I would like to ask you to join me in one request. We can make the word outbehave a word in the dictionary. It would be a really neat thing to do. But let's do that because we focus on our behaviors and it becomes our habit. And we'll earn our way into the dictionary because collectively we inspired others to take control of how we live our lives and conduct our affairs through our behavior.
Well, Dov, it's a great way to end. You see how fortunate I was when I happened to get into the lift with this guy. He's been out teaching me ever since. We're going to be downstairs signing books. Thank you all very much for coming.
Thank you, Tom.